At 2:14 hours, 480 kilometers south of Iceland, the stillness of the Atlantic was broken by a chilling acoustic signal not heard since the Cold War. A Russian Kilo-class submarine abruptly activated its sonar, fixing its torpedo guidance on a U.S. vessel with clear hostile intent. The Russian commander believed he had the advantage, not realizing that a U.S. Navy destroyer was already watching from the darkness, poised to respond in a way that could reshape the balance of naval power in just 90 seconds. Moscow had placed a billion-dollar submarine on a dangerous gamble, and Washington was fully prepared to answer. What followed was a silent contest of nerves that sent shockwaves through the Kremlin's inner circle. Stay with this story to the very end, because only then does it become clear why America's real strength is not something captured in headlines. It is a precise, relentless system of technological dominance that leaves almost no margin for Russian miscalculation. The confrontation had started weeks earlier, when the Belawan, a vessel already identified by the U.S. Department of State as transporting Iranian oil linked to regional destabilization, tried to exploit a legal loophole in the Caribbean. For the sailors and officers of the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard, this was never about a single ship alone. It was about protecting the credibility of the global financial system and the $3.4 trillion in trade that depends on these waters being governed by international law rather than hidden networks operating in the dark. Facing mounting pressure to keep its shadow fleet of more than 1,000 aging tankers moving in support of its weakened economy and military ambitions, the Kremlin made an extraordinary move. It retroactively declared the stateless vessel a protected Russian sovereign asset while it was already at sea. It was a step born of urgency, a last-ditch legal maneuver meant to force American commanders into an impossible decision: either allow the illicit cargo to continue on its path or risk a direct military clash with a nuclear power. For veterans watching, the situation may echo the tense naval standoffs of the 1980s, but this time the danger is amplified by modern electronic warfare and legal manipulation. If you believe the United States should respond more firmly to these covert tanker operations, let us know in the comments which vessel we should follow next. The world is watching, and the tension is sharp enough to feel. As the U.S. Coast Guard holds its course despite Russian warnings, Moscow's strategy is starting to look every bit as worn out as the tankers it is trying to defend. By deploying a submarine and surface warships to escort what is presented as a civilian vessel, Russia is trying to sell the image of a global navy capable of defending its interests anywhere on the planet. But from the American perspective, that image is far easier to see through than Moscow would like. The reality is much less impressive. Russia's northern fleet is operating under pressure, stretched by shrinking budgets and mounting strain, and it is leaning on intimidation to hide a much deeper weakness. Its economy is being squeezed by the same sanctions these tankers are meant to bypass. At its core, the mission is about survival. Every barrel of oil that reaches port gives Moscow a little more time to support its military ambitions. Their calculation is straightforward: raise the stakes, bring a submarine into the picture, and assume Washington will step back rather than risk a global crisis. In that gamble, the Marinara becomes more than a ship. It becomes a 600-foot wall of steel and oil, used as cover in a much larger geopolitical play. Russian state media, including RT, has even pushed edited footage of the chase in an effort to frame the U.S. Coast Guard as the aggressor confronting an innocent commercial vessel. But that version of events falls apart the moment the ship's technical reality comes into focus. A dark AIS profile, questionable registration, and a pattern that raises more questions than answers. What Russia sees as pressure, the United States sees as a test. Moscow is probing for hesitation, searching for any weakness along NATO's outer edge, without realizing it may be heading straight into an overwhelming technological disadvantage. That gap in capability is enormous, and it starts with the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Oscar Austin, a 9,300-ton warship built for exactly this kind of high-stakes environment. While the Russian Kilo-class submarine depends on stealth and silence to stay alive, the Oscar Austin is designed to strip away that advantage. Its Aegis combat system, paired with the AN/SPY-1D phased array radar and the AN/SQQ-89V-15 undersea warfare suite, gives U.S. forces a level of awareness that can make the ocean feel far less forgiving for any submarine trying to hide below the surface. And that awareness is backed by speed and precision. The destroyer carries the Mark 54 lightweight torpedo, a weapon built specifically to track and defeat diesel-electric submarines operating in shallow water, including boats like the Kilo. It also deploys the RUM-139 vertical launch ASROC, capable of sending a deadly payload toward a submarine's position in well under 90 seconds from miles away. In a confrontation like this, that kind of response time can change everything before the other side fully understands what is happening. Above them, a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, one of the most advanced submarine hunting platforms in service, released a spread of 32 sonobuoys. Building a digital trap, the Russian captain had little chance of slipping through. The P-8A's Raytheon APY-10 radar is sensitive enough to spot something as small as a submarine snorkel from miles away, even in rough seas. While Russia was still relying on old-school tactics, the U.S. Navy was operating across multiple domains with sensors from the ocean floor to orbit connected in one seamless combat network. The Kilo-class submarine may have been built for stealth, but silence is never absolute. Its propulsion system produces an acoustic fingerprint the U.S. Navy has studied and cataloged for decades. American analysts know the sound of its pumps, the rhythm of its propellers, and the tiny mechanical details that set it apart underwater. In that sense, this was never an even contest. It was a clear display of overwhelming naval precision. The turning point came at 3:45 when the Russian submarine made one last risky move. It began a rapid ascent, apparently meant to break the surface and pressure the U.S. Coast Guard vessel through sheer presence. But the USS Oscar Austin was already where it needed to be, having anticipated the maneuver before the submarine's ballast tanks had fully done their work. As the 4,000-ton Kilo rose through the Atlantic like a dark whale, it surfaced under the gaze of the destroyer's 5-inch Mark 45 naval gun, while its close-in defensive systems were already tracking the target with exacting focus. The American commander did not turn away. He stayed on course with complete discipline, holding a steady 18 knots less than 500 yards from the weathered hull of the Marinara and the black steel of the submarine beside it. Inside the Combat Information Center, the mood remained controlled and professional, a sharp contrast to the urgent Russian radio traffic demanding that the United States end what they called an unlawful pursuit. But the Americans did not need to fire. Their message was delivered without a single shot. They controlled the situation, the space, and the pace of the encounter. When a second U.S. destroyer, the USS Donald Cook, appeared on the horizon, the balance shifted beyond doubt. The Russian surface ships could see the numbers no longer worked in their favor. The so-called black hole had been forced onto the surface, stripped of the concealment that gave it value, and left exposed by the presence of a more capable opponent. For the Russian captain, the mission was effectively over the moment his periscope caught sight of the American flag snapping in the Atlantic wind. What followed left the Kremlin facing an uncomfortable reality and an embarrassing image problem. State media could still try to frame the episode as a successful defense of a civilian vessel. But naval observers saw something very different. A Russian submarine had been forced to surface and photographed by the very ships it was meant to intimidate. And the Marinara, despite its new identity and flag, remained under close watch, its movements tracked around the clock by NATO as it pushed slowly toward the North Sea. These Shadow Fleet tankers also carry a growing environmental danger. Many of them are more than 15 years old, poorly maintained, and backed by weak insurance, turning every voyage into a serious risk. But the United States has made one point unmistakably clear. No vessel can invent legal protection in real time to dodge international law. The earlier seizures of other tankers, including the Skipper and the Sentries, showed that enforcement pressure is real and that the wider containment effort is still in place. Russia's attempt to raise the stakes only produced the opposite result. Instead of forcing a retreat, it brought even more American resources into the area, including F-35s now positioned in northern Europe to strengthen an already formidable layer of air cover. For Moscow, the price of this failed escort mission runs into the millions. But the financial cost may be the least damaging part. The reputational blow, especially in front of partners and observers abroad, is far harder to measure. Russia revealed its move, and the U.S. Navy answered with overwhelming confidence. The bigger lesson from this confrontation is hard to ignore. In today's world, speed of information and the discipline of a highly trained crew can matter more than any single weapons platform. Moscow learned an expensive lesson about the limits of reckless pressure. It tried to use an aging tanker as a piece in a larger geopolitical contest, but it ran into a navy that has spent 75 years refining how to keep sea lanes open and enforce the rules that govern them. The message is straightforward. You do not step into a technology-driven contest against an opponent that has already shaped the environment and mastered the systems that control it. The seas do not belong to those who hide behind false identities. They belong to those who command them with accuracy, coordination, and discipline. And when you look at the empty deck of the Marinara and the fading wake of a submarine forced to back away, the image says a great deal on its own. It is a reminder that security depends on constant vigilance and on the calm determination of the people who stand watch when the pressure is highest. What should happen next? Should the U.S. Navy begin boarding these Shadow Fleet tankers right away, or continue tightening the pressure through surveillance and enforcement? Share your view below, and we'll continue the analysis in the next video. At first light, as the cold mist over the North Atlantic began to clear, the contrast became even sharper. The Marinara, its paint peeling and dark smoke pouring from worn-out engines, looked like a ship from another era beside the sharp, modern profile of the USS Oscar Austin. The American crew, many from families whose relatives served in these same waters during World War II, moved with the quiet confidence that comes from long preparation and constant repetition. They were more than sailors carrying out a mission. They were a living expression of national resolve. When the Russian Kilo-class submarine finally slipped back beneath the surface, it did so under the close watch of sonar operators inside the USS Oscar Austin's Combat Information Center. From that moment on, every maneuver, every turn, and every change in depth was tracked, logged, and passed up the chain in real time. Russia's attempt at maskirovka, or battlefield deception, had fallen apart, because in the modern maritime domain, secrecy becomes very fragile when your opponent has the sensors, reach, and coordination to follow every move. The incident also underscored how closely the United States now operates with its North Atlantic allies. While the Oscar Austin held the central role, British Merlin helicopters and French frigates formed part of the wider surveillance and response network covering the region. That is the deeper challenge facing the Kremlin. It is not only American capability that complicates their plans, but the combined strength of an alliance built around shared intelligence, coordinated tactics, and a common strategic purpose. The Shadow Fleet is not just a Russian issue. It is a broader threat to maritime safety and global economic stability. Many of these aging tankers sail without reliable insurance, proper oversight, or consistent maintenance, making them a serious risk to every coastline and shipping lane they pass. By intercepting the Marinara, the U.S. Navy was doing more than enforcing sanctions. It was also helping protect marine environments and the livelihoods of millions of people who depend on safe, open, and clean seas. The restraint shown by American commanders, even when facing a surface submarine at extremely close range, says just as much as the hardware involved. It reflects a military posture built not around recklessness, but around control, discipline, and readiness. The United States does not go looking for confrontation, but it makes clear that it is prepared to respond decisively when necessary. Looking ahead, Moscow is unlikely to abandon these tactics as its room to maneuver continues to shrink. But each new provocation comes with a cost. Every encounter gives the United States and NATO more insight into Russian procedures, response patterns, and technical behavior. Every sonar pulse, every radio exchange, and every tactical adjustment made by the Russian escort became another piece of intelligence collected by American and Allied electronic warfare systems. In trying to send a message, the Kremlin may have revealed far more than it intended. In the end, Moscow's effort to project strength only exposed its own weaknesses. The Marinara may eventually reach its destination or be forced to turn back, but the shadow it tried to hide behind has already been cut through by the visible advantage of American sea power. The message to the world is unmistakable. The international order will be defended, and those who try to undermine it through intimidation and deception may find themselves in the same position as the Russian submarine, exposed, outmatched, and compelled to withdraw. That is the reality of modern maritime power, and it is likely to remain so as long as the United States Navy continues standing watch over the world's key sea lanes and strategic gateways. As the vessels separated, the USS Oscar Austin turned back toward its patrol area, its crew already shifting focus to the next possible contact. For them, it was another assignment, another day of preserving stability through readiness and presence. For the wider world, it was a reminder that the ocean remains one of the ultimate arenas of power and influence. The advanced reach of the Aegis system, the precision surveillance of the P-8A Poseidon, and the steady discipline of the American sailor form part of the barrier that stands between order and disorder at sea. The Russian tanker Marinara may continue its voyage for now, but the episode surrounding it stands as a lasting example of what can happen when a declining power tests a far stronger opponent. It was a story of misplaced confidence colliding with proven capability. And for those who understand the responsibility carried by commanders at sea, this encounter was more than a confrontation, and it was a lesson in modern naval statecraft. Stay with us as we continue tracking critical flashpoints around the world, bringing you technical insight and tactical analysis that go beyond the headlines. The era of shadow fleets may be growing, but global reach, coordination, and maritime strength still shape the balance of power. Thank you for your support and your interest in defense and global security. Stay alert, stay informed, and remember, when the stakes rise as high as the North Atlantic swells, excellence is never optional. Would you like me to analyze the specific electronic warfare capabilities of the USS Donald Cook that may have played a role during this standoff?